I stood on the front steps of my own house, gripping my grandchildren's small hands while my husband of 39 years pushed divorce papers across the porch railing toward me. Beside him stood a woman young enough to be our niece, arms crossed, smiling like the outcome had already been decided. "Start packing," she told me. "There's no place here for a freeloader." I looked from her glossy smile to my husband's tired, distant eyes. Less than 2 hours earlier, I had learned that I'd inherited $19 million and a century-old office building in Lower Manhattan. The letter confirming it was still folded inside my handbag, and neither of them had the faintest idea it was there. I didn't cry. I smiled. "What exactly is funny?" she snapped. I took a breath, held her stare, and said, "Actually, this house belongs to a euro. But before I tell you what I said next, you should understand how an ordinary 61-year-old grandmother ended up on that porch, carrying the biggest secret of her life against her hip like it weighed nothing at all. My name is Grace Whitfield, though most people just call me Gigi. If you'd passed me on the street a week before any of this happened, you wouldn't have looked twice. 3 mornings a week, I worked behind the counter of a small used bookstore in our town in Putnam County, an hour north of the city. I liked matching people with stories they didn't know they needed a euro, a mystery for a retired policeman, a gentle novel for a teenager going through a rough year. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it gave my days a shape I loved. For 39 years, my husband Walter and I had built what I thought was a solid, respectable life. We didn't start with much. Our first apartment had a leaning bookshelf, a window unit that groaned all summer, and a card table we called a dining set. Walter wanted to build a landscaping and construction company from nothing, and I believed in that dream enough to work double shifts at a dentist's office while he chased it. There were years I did his invoices after the kids were asleep. Years I wore the same winter coat because the crew needed new equipment. Years I smiled through worry so he wouldn't lose his nerve. Eventually, the business took off. People called him a self-made man. I never corrected them. I never wanted a medal for it. That's not how I thought marriage was supposed to work. There were harder stretches too, ones I rarely talked about even with Claire. A year when Walter's first crew walked off a job over a payment dispute, and I quietly moved money out of our own savings to cover it, so he wouldn't have to explain it to the bank. A stretch where I picked up a second part-time job, just so the kids could stay in their same school instead of switching mid-year. None of it felt like sacrifice at the time. It felt like marriage. Our daughter Claire was 36 now, raising 2 kids on her own after a difficult divorce. Money was tight for her, but she never complained about it. She worked as a physical therapist and still found the energy to volunteer for every school bake sale, showing up with trays of lemon bars at 6 in the morning like it was nothing. Our son Tyler was 33 and taught American history at the public high school. He used to say history wasn't really about dates a euro. It was about the choices people made when no one was watching. I thought about that line a lot in the months that followed. The morning everything changed, nothing seemed unusual. I restocked a shelf of paperbacks, talked with a regular customer about a novel she'd just finished, and laughed with a boy who'd finally worked up the courage to buy a book without his mother picking it for him. Around 1 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something told me not to. "Mrs. Grace Whitfield?" A calm, unfamiliar voice asked. "Speaking. My name is James Whitcomb. I'm an estate attorney here in Manhattan. I'm calling about your great-aunt, Cordelia Ashworth." I nearly dropped the phone. "My great-aunt Cordelia?" "Yes, ma'am. I hadn't seen Aunt Cordelia in years. She was the relative people whispered about at family gatherings a euro, never married, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be, and somehow, over decades, she'd turned a handful of real estate investments into a genuine fortune. Family stories claimed she owned property scattered across the city, though nobody agreed on how much. She'd quietly pulled away from the family after my grandmother passed, and time did the rest. "I'm sorry to say you've reached me too late for a proper visit," I told him. We hadn't spoken in years. "I understand. I'm sorry to inform you that Miss Ashworth passed away 3 weeks ago." I closed my eyes. Even when a life has been long and full, the news still lands with weight. "I'm very sorry to hear that. There's another reason for my call," he continued. "You've been named the primary beneficiary of her estate." For a moment I was certain he had the wrong Grace Whitfield. "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't. The will has been reviewed several times over. Every requirement has been met." Then he read off calmly, like he was listing a grocery order, what Aunt Cordelia had left behind. $19 million. A restored office building in Lower Manhattan. Controlling interest in a charitable foundation she'd started decades earlier. I couldn't speak. The bookstore around me seemed to go quiet. Why me? I finally whispered. I can't answer that fully over the phone. Miss Ashworth left a personal letter that may explain her thinking. We'd like you to come in tomorrow morning. I leaned against the shelf because my legs had gone unsteady. There is one request, he added. Until the transfer is finalized, we'd ask that you keep this confidential. You have my word. After we hung up, I stood there staring at the spines of 100 paperbacks. $19 million. The number didn't feel real. Strangely, I wasn't thinking about vacations or diamonds. My first thought was Claire Euro. She'd never have to stress over a mortgage payment again. My second thought was Tyler, whose classroom always seemed to need supplies he bought out of his own pocket. Then I thought about Walter. Maybe this was our chance to finally slow down. We'd talked for years about the coast of Maine, about driving through Vermont in October, about all the trips we kept postponing. I finished my shift, then drove to pick up my grandchildren, Ruby and Miles, from school. The moment they climbed into the back seat, my worries melted away. Gigi, I got every spelling word right, Miles announced. Ruby rolled her eyes. He's told everyone in his class twice. I got everyone right, he repeated. I heard you the first time, I laughed. They argued the whole ride about whose turn it was to pick the radio station, then begged for frozen yogurt. I told them we'd celebrate soon, not mentioning that I was quietly picturing their college tuition already paid, their futures a little lighter than I'd ever dared to plan. As we turned onto our street, I noticed two unfamiliar luxury SUVs parked in our driveway. Neither belonged to Walter. Something cold settled in my stomach. Gigi, Ruby asked quietly. Everything's fine, sweetheart. But I already suspected it wasn't. The moment I stepped out of the car, the afternoon felt too still. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. Ruby slipped her hand into mine. Miles took my other hand without a word. Children sense trouble long before adults will admit it exists. Walter stood on the porch. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman I'd never met face to face, though I recognized her instantly from a photo I'd stumbled across months earlier. Tall, put together, somewhere in her mid-30s, with the kind of posture that comes from always getting what she wants. Her name was Renata Cole, one of the busiest commercial real estate agents in the county. I'd heard her name from neighbors more than once. I'd also seen it pop up on Walter's phone one too many times for comfort. I'd asked him about her once. Without glancing up from his plate, he'd said, "Commercial agent. Helping a client of mine." I let it go. After 39 years, trust turns into a habit more than a decision. I wished, standing there, that I'd questioned that habit sooner. Several cardboard boxes sat stacked along the porch steps. My planters had been shoved aside to make room. One box had my name scrawled across it in thick marker. Grace. Not honey. Not sweetheart. Just my name, colder than anything either of them could have said out loud. Walter folded his arms. "You're home." His voice was businesslike, like I was a client running late. "I live here," I said quietly. Renata offered a smile that never reached her eyes. "Let's just get this over with." My heart started pounding. I glanced at the kids. "Why don't you two wait by Mrs. Dawson's for a minute?" "No," Miles whispered. "I want to stay with you." Walter sighed. "They don't need to hear this." "Then maybe you shouldn't have picked today," I said. He looked away, and that small gesture stung worse than shouting would have. Renata stepped forward with a manila folder. She was the one who handed it to me €1, not Walter. That detail alone told me more about my marriage than any conversation ever could. "These are the divorce papers," Walter said. No apology. No mention of 39 years. Just a fact delivered flat. "I filed a few months ago." "A few months ago?" "I wanted everything in order before we talked." "In order?" I almost laughed. Such a tidy word for taking apart an entire life. "When exactly were you planning to tell me?" "When the timing made sense." I'd spent decades arranging my own life around his timing €1, waiting for the slow season, waiting for the business to steady, waiting for retirement. Apparently I'd waited too long. Renata looped her arm through his, not affectionately €1 possessively. "I think honesty is healthier than pretending," she said, her perfume thick in the summer air. Walter said nothing. She kept talking as if she had every right to. "The truth is, Walter has outgrown this marriage." I looked straight at him. "Is that how you feel?" He hesitated only a second. Yes. One word. 39 years, undone by one syllable. I noticed Ruby wiping her eyes, Miles pressing himself against my side. My chest broke, not for me, but for them. No child should have to watch adults behave like this. I crouched down to their level. Would you two do me a favor and go see if Mrs. Dawson's home? They nodded reluctantly. Mrs. Dawson had lived next door for nearly 30 years, and the second she saw their faces, she hurried across her lawn without a single question, taking each of them by the hand. I love you, Gigi, Miles called back. I love you more. Once they were inside, I turned back to my husband. Renata sighed dramatically. Now that the audience is gone, she crossed her arms. I'll be blunt. You've been living off Walter for years. I blinked. Living off him. I'd balanced his books, fielded his angry vendor calls, skipped vacations because payroll came first, sold my own mother's earrings to keep the company afloat during a bad year. And somehow I was the burden. You're old enough to understand it's time to move on, she continued, gesturing at the boxes. We packed the essentials. The essentials. As if 4 decades could fit into 6 cardboard boxes. My photo albums? I asked. Walter shifted uncomfortably. In storage. My grandmother's china? We didn't think you'd need it. That china had survived 3 generations. Apparently memories no longer counted as necessities. Renata shrugged. You can always buy new dishes. I looked at Walter one last time, hoping for a flicker of the man I'd married. Instead I saw exhaustion. Maybe even relief. I never wanted this to get ugly, he muttered. You brought another woman to our front porch. I know. No, I said softly. I don't think you do. Renata checked her watch, bored. Can we finish this? You need to grab whatever's left and go before dinner. I said nothing, and she mistook my silence for surrender. She smiled wider. Pack your bags. A small tilt of her head. There's no place here for a freeloader. The words hung in the warm air. From behind her window, Mrs. Dawson gasped loud enough for me to hear it across the yard. Walter shut his eyes for half a second, embarrassed, but he still didn't say a word in my defense. That was the moment something in me went strangely calm. Not cold, not furious, just calm. Because once people finally show you who they are, the confusion disappears, and all that's left is clarity. I felt the weight of the envelope in my purse. The attorney's letter. $19 million. A building. A new life waiting one train ride away. Neither of them had any idea, and somehow that made their cruelty feel small. I looked at Renata, then at Walter, then at the house we'd bought together decades ago. Finally, I smiled a euro, not bitter, not triumphant. The smile of someone who'd just realized she wasn't the one about to lose everything. Renata frowned. What's so funny? I held her gaze and answered in the steadiest voice I'd used all day. Actually, a euro. I nodded toward the front door. This house belongs to me. Walter laughed first, a short, dismissive sound. Renata joined him almost immediately. Oh, that's cute. You're really in denial. No, I said. Walter, do you remember the downturn 15 years ago? When the company nearly went under. His smile faded. You were terrified the bank would come after the house. I signed every paper your lawyer put in front of me. One of them moved the deed into my name to protect the property while the business recovered. Renata's head snapped toward him. What is she talking about? Walter's mouth opened, and nothing came out. You always said we'd switch it back once things stabilized, I said gently. We never did. Silence dropped over the porch. For the first time all afternoon, Walter looked genuinely afraid. That's impossible, Renata said quickly. Tell her she's wrong. He didn't answer, and his silence told her more than any explanation could have. You changed the deed, I said. Your own attorney recommended it. He said it would only be temporary. I thought it had been transferred back, Walter said weakly. You thought. Renata's confidence cracked. She rounded on him. You told me this house was yours. It was supposed to be, he said. I shook my head. No, Walter. It was supposed to be ours. Neither of them spoke again. I walked past the boxes without touching one, took out my key, and unlocked my own front door. Before stepping inside, I turned back. I'll have my attorney review these papers. Then I closed the door behind me. For the first time in years, the quiet inside that house felt peaceful instead of lonely. I leaned against the hallway wall and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands shook a euro, not from doubt, but from finally letting myself stop pretending. 39 years of overlooking small disappointments had built, quietly, toward one enormous betrayal. The kitchen looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. My coffee mug still sat in the sink. A grocery list hung under a magnet from Acadia National Park, where Walter and I had always promised each other we'd go once he retired. I looked at that magnet for a long moment, then took it down. Some dreams no longer belonged on my refrigerator. A soft knock came at the back door. Mrs. Dawson stood there with Ruby and Miles. "Thought you might need a hug," she said. "I probably do." She hugged me without asking a single question. Sometimes a neighbor of 30 years doesn't need one. The kids ran off to the family room. Mrs. Dawson lowered her voice. "Are you all right?" "I will be." That's an interesting answer. It surprised me too. After she left, I made grilled cheese for the kids. Routine has a way of steadying frightened little hearts. Ruby finally asked what she'd been holding in. "Gigi, are you and Grandpa mad at each other?" I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people. "Did Grandpa hurt you?" "Yes." She looked down at her plate. "Will you still be my grandma?" I reached across and touched her cheek. Nothing in this world could ever change that. She smiled for the first time since we'd come home, and that smile reminded me exactly why I couldn't let bitterness take root. The kids stayed the night in the guest room. Walter never came back. Around 9, my phone rang the Manhattan number again. "Mrs. Whitfield," James Whitcomb said. "Just confirming tomorrow's appointment." "I'll be there. There are documents needing your signature, and we have Miss Ashworth's personal letter ready for you." His calm, professional tone steadied me. After we hung up, I set the confidential envelope on the dining room table and just stared at it. $19 million. A building. The words still didn't feel real, and somehow they mattered less than they had that afternoon. Money couldn't buy back trust. It couldn't undo humiliation. It certainly couldn't repair a marriage built on promises quietly abandoned by one person. But it did represent something else, freedom. The next morning, after Claire picked up the kids for camp, I took the train into the city. I'd made that ride countless times over the years, usually for a museum or a matinee. This time felt entirely different. As the skyline came into view past the river, I wondered how many times Aunt Cordelia had looked at those same buildings while quietly deciding my future. The law office sat on the 22nd floor of a building near Bryant Park. Dark wood, fresh flowers, hushed conversation. James Whitcomb was in his late 50s, in a gray suit, with kind eyes behind thin glasses. "My condolences again for your loss," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you." He led me to a conference room overlooking Midtown, where several folders waited on a polished table. "Shall we introduce you to your new responsibilities?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of signatures and numbers. Aunt Cordelia's estate was even more meticulously organized than family gossip had suggested. The Lower Manhattan office building had been fully restored years earlier and was almost entirely leased to law firms, small nonprofits, and a design studio. Its rental income alone brought in millions a year. The $19 million wasn't sitting in a vault somewhere. It lived in investment accounts, municipal bonds, and carefully managed funds meant for long-term stability. Then came the foundation. It funded literacy programs, senior housing repairs, and neighborhood libraries across the state. "She supported libraries," I said, smiling. "That made perfect sense to everyone who knew her," Whitcomb said warmly. Finally, he opened one last folder. "This is Miss Ashworth's letter to you." My name was written across the envelope in elegant blue ink. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. "Dear Grace, if you're reading this, I've finally run out of time. You may be wondering why I chose you. The answer is simple. I watched, asterisk." I frowned. "Watched?" "She anticipated that sentence would surprise you," Whitcomb said gently. I kept reading. A family reveals itself on ordinary Tuesdays, not at holidays or weddings. I watched you visit your grandmother when others made excuses. I watched you quietly help your neighbors. I watched you support your husband without ever asking for credit. I even visited that little bookstore of yours more than once over the years. Money magnifies character. It doesn't create it. The wrong relatives always wanted my buildings. You never wanted anything. That's exactly why you deserve them, asterisk. By the final line, I was crying openly. Whitcomb respectfully looked out the window until I finished. "I had no idea she knew me that well," I said. "She knew you remarkably well." He slid another folder toward me. "One more matter. Given the size of the inheritance, privacy will matter. The settlement will eventually become public record. I understand. I'd recommend saying as little as possible until you're ready. I nodded. There was one more secret I planned on keeping for now. Walter still had no idea that while he thought he was divorcing a woman with modest savings, he'd actually walked away from someone whose entire life had just changed. I wasn't sure yet whether that knowledge would ever come from me. I didn't go shopping after leaving his office. I didn't look at apartments over the park or book a table anywhere fancy. I walked 3 blocks to a diner, ordered coffee and a turkey sandwich, and opened a yellow legal pad. For 39 years, I'd been the one organizing everything €, grocery budgets, holiday dinners, college applications, payroll during the lean years. Now I had a different future to plan. I wrote one line across the top of the page. Don't let money change who you are. I underlined it twice, and it stayed folded in my purse for the next year, a compass whenever life threatened to spin too fast. I sat in that diner for close to an hour, long after my coffee went cold, making a list of the people I wanted to call before the news ever reached them secondhand. Claire first, then Tyler, then Mrs. Dawson, who deserved to hear it from me and not from some article. I didn't write Walter's name down at all, and it took me a moment to notice that I hadn't, and another moment to decide I was at peace with that. The following weeks blurred into meetings with attorneys and accountants. I learned more about commercial real estate than I ever thought I'd need to know €, cap rates, lease renewals, capital reserve accounts. Words that had meant nothing to me a month earlier and now filled entire afternoons. The building Aunt Cordelia left me had stood in Lower Manhattan for nearly a century, its stone face weathering wars, blackouts, and financial crashes, while thousands of people walked through its doors every weekday without ever knowing the quiet woman who now owned it. Every time I visited, I felt less like an owner and more like a caretaker, and that suited me just fine. The property manager, Anthony Reyes, had worked there for over 20 years. I've met plenty of building owners, he told me on my first tour. They usually ask one question, which is, how much money can this place make? You didn't ask that. You asked where the tenants eat lunch. I suppose I did. You also asked which employees have been here longest. People matter to you. He nodded approvingly. I think Miss Ashworth chose well. Rather than replace experienced staff, I listened to them. Instead of raising rents sharply, I approved gradual upgrades that benefited everyone €, better lobby lighting, modern elevators, a new heating system before another rough winter. Small, practical decisions, the kind Aunt Cordelia herself probably would have made. Meanwhile, the foundation held its first board meeting with me as chair. I walked in nervous, certain the longtime members would see me as an outsider. Instead, they welcomed me. Cordelia always trusted her instincts, one older gentleman said. If she chose you, we're glad to hear your ideas. My ideas were simple. Expand literacy programs, grow scholarships for community college and trade school students, support libraries in underserved neighborhoods, fund home repairs for seniors on fixed incomes. None of it would make headlines, but it would change lives. Claire eventually left her private practice to become the foundation's executive director. I don't know if I'm qualified, she admitted. You've spent your whole career helping people rebuild, I told her. That's exactly what this does. Watching my daughter step into that work filled me with a pride no amount of money could match. Tyler became an educational advisor for the scholarship program, his years in the classroom finally paying off in a different way. I know exactly which students slipped through the cracks, he said during one planning session. Then let's build something sturdy enough to catch them. He smiled. You sound like Dad talking about foundations. The comment caught us both off guard. Finally, I said softly, I hope I'm building something a little more solid. At home, things stayed complicated. Walter had moved into a rental across town, and communication mostly went through lawyers. His attorney kept asking me to vacate the house during the divorce proceedings. Mine simply sent back copies of the deed, and the request stopped. Then another development arrived. My attorney, Linda Marsh, asked me to sit down with a forensic accountant. You'll want to hear this in person, she said. He spread several financial statements across the table. I've gone through your husband's business records. There are some significant irregularities. He pointed to highlighted transactions €, company funds covering luxury trips, jewelry, a leased sports car, thousands in restaurant charges, all tied to Renata. I thought he was paying for those personally, I said. So did he apparently. The company paid. He slid another document toward me. There are also undisclosed investment accounts, hidden from you and possibly from the tax authorities. My marriage hadn't ended, because Walter fell for someone else. It had been quietly unraveling under my feet long before I noticed. Missing funds, questionable bookkeeping, contracts oddly favorable to certain subcontractors. Mrs. Whitfield, I want to be clear, we're not accusing anyone of a crime. I appreciate that, but these records deserve a closer look. Then let the records speak for themselves, I said. That became my approach, no anonymous calls, no revenge schemes, no public accusations. If laws had been broken, the truth would surface through proper channels. I had no interest in destroying him. I just refused to protect him anymore. Months later, the local business press announced that Aunt Cordelia Ashworth's estate had officially settled. My photo ran beside an article about the foundation's expanded community programs. The headline wasn't about the money, it was about scholarships and literacy grants, and I appreciated that more than I expected to. That afternoon my phone rang. Walter. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Finally I picked up. Grace. His voice sounded like nothing I'd heard from him before. You inherited Cordelia Ashworth's estate. I said nothing. I just saw the news. I didn't know. No, I whispered to the empty room. You didn't. The next voicemail came from Renata, her tone entirely different from the woman who'd stood on my porch. Grace, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd really love to grab coffee. I deleted it before it finished. The following week, Walter started sending handwritten letters, not texts, actual letters. He apologized for being distant, admitted he'd handled everything badly, wrote that 39 years couldn't just be erased. For the first time in months, I cried, not because I wanted him back, but because I finally understood something painful. He hadn't written those letters when he thought I was an ordinary retired bookstore clerk. He wrote them after learning I owned a Manhattan office building. That realization closed the last thin thread of hope I hadn't even known was still hanging on. Money hadn't changed me. It had simply revealed everyone else. The first snow came early that December. I stood in the kitchen watching it settle over the same backyard where Walter once taught Tyler to catch a baseball, where Claire had insisted every snowman needed a scarf. A place can hold beautiful memories and painful ones without asking permission first. The divorce was finalized just before Christmas, no courtroom drama, no raised voices, just a judge's signature and the quiet close of a marriage that had lasted nearly 40 years. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Not happy exactly. Healing isn't the same thing as happiness. But free. The forensic findings kept moving through proper channels. A few months later, Linda called. I wanted you to hear this before it hits the papers. Federal auditors have opened a formal review of Walter's company. I closed my eyes. So it begins. This wasn't started because of anything you did, she reminded me. The discrepancies had reached regulators through routine disclosures tied to the divorce filings and corporate paperwork, no anonymous tips, no secret plotting. Just documents doing what documents eventually do. By spring, the business press was reporting that Walter's company was in serious financial trouble. Projects stalled. Banks pulled back. Longtime clients quietly drifted elsewhere. Then came lawsuits from subcontractors claiming unpaid invoices. One morning, Tyler called. Mom, are you sitting down? I am now. The company filed for bankruptcy. I was quiet for a long moment. That business had once been our shared dream, grown from one pickup truck and a folding table into a respected regional contractor. Watching it collapse felt like watching an old family home get demolished, necessary, maybe, but still painful. I never wanted this, I admitted. I know, Tyler said gently. You just stopped carrying it. A week later, more news moved through town. Renata had left Walter, and not quietly. One of Claire's friends in commercial real estate mentioned she'd been seen at a few galas with a developer from further up the coast, someone with several luxury properties to his name. Claire hesitated before telling me. I wasn't sure you'd want to know. I appreciate you being honest. Does it satisfy you? I thought about it. No. I don't enjoy watching people find out that selfish choices have consequences. But she hurt you. So did he. Revenge sounds thrilling in stories, I said, pouring us both more tea. In real life, it mostly just looks like sadness. She squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. I've made plenty of mistakes. Not this one. A few weeks after that, Walter called again, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Grace, would you meet me? I don't think that's wise. Please. I don't want anything. Just one honest conversation. I agreed. We met at a small diner between our two houses €1, the kind of place where we used to eat on Saturday mornings early in our marriage, back when pancakes cost less than $2. The waitress recognized us instantly. Haven't seen you two together in a while. Walter forced a smile. It's been some time. Once she'd poured our coffee and left, neither of us spoke for a while. A year had changed him €, his shoulders lower, his hair almost fully gray, the confidence that used to fill a room quietly gone. Finally he looked up. I'm sorry. I waited. No excuses came. Just those two words, and then, I'm sorry for all of it. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. Go on. I thought success meant never looking back, he said, eyes filling. I kept chasing bigger contracts, bigger houses, bigger everything. I stopped noticing who made any of it possible. A pause. I convinced myself you'd always just be there. I confused loyalty with weakness. That sentence hurt more than everything else he'd said, because it was true. When Renata came along, he continued, she admired the version of myself I wanted to believe in, the successful businessman. And I liked being admired. He laughed bitterly. Turns out she admired my money even more. Neither of us smiled. I deserved that lesson, he said. I watched the steam rise off my cup. You know what surprised me most? You never tried to ruin me. I didn't need to. I know. You simply stopped protecting me. There it was €, the truth. For decades I'd quietly solved problems before they ever reached him, smoothed things over, made excuses, covered mistakes. Once I stopped, he finally had to face himself. I've had a lot of time to think, he said. I keep remembering things. Like what? The nights you stayed up doing payroll. The birthday you canceled because one of my guys needed emergency surgery. I don't think I ever thanked you. You didn't. I'm thanking you now. Thank you, I said. Nearly 40 years late, but sincere all the same. He took a breath. I know I shouldn't expect another chance. There isn't one. I know. I've forgiven you. He looked startled. You have. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation, I said slowly, choosing each word. I refuse to carry bitterness for the rest of my life. But I won't pretend trust can be rebuilt after what happened. He nodded. I understand. I hope you build a peaceful life. I'll try. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. Grace, I always thought inheriting all that money made you the richest person in the room. He looked at me directly. I was wrong. Before I could answer, he added quietly, you were richer than me long before your aunt ever wrote that will. He walked out into the afternoon sun alone, his steps slower than I remembered. For the first time since it had all begun, I didn't see an enemy €, just an aging man who'd traded away the best parts of his life before realizing what they were worth. That wasn't a victory. It was simply the truth, and somehow the truth was enough. A year after I stood on my front porch holding divorce papers in one hand and the biggest secret of my life in the other, I found myself on the rooftop terrace of the building Aunt Cordelia had entrusted to me. The city spread out in every direction, cabs weaving through the streets far below like pieces on a board, afternoon light bouncing off glass towers, while the older brick buildings reminded me that this city has always known how to hold yesterday and tomorrow at once. I rested my hands on the stone railing and just breathed for a while. When I first inherited this place, I thought it meant wealth. Now I understood it meant responsibility. Money can change your address. Character determines whether people are glad you arrived. Anthony still ran the building day to day, and he liked to joke that I'd become a better landlord than half the professionals he'd worked under over the years, simply because I still answered my own phone. Miss Ashworth used to say the same thing, he told me once. That the moment you stop picking up the phone yourself is the moment you've stopped actually owning the place. I thought about that every time a tenant called with a leaking pipe or a broken thermostat, and I never once let it go to voicemail. The foundation had just completed its first full year under my leadership, and instead of shrinking, it had grown. We'd expanded literacy programs into dozens of libraries statewide, funded scholarships for students in community college, trade school, and nursing programs, and partnered with groups that repaired homes for low-income seniors so they could stay in the neighborhoods they'd spent their lives building. One of my favorite projects turned an unused floor of the office building into a resource center €. Veterans came weekly for job counseling. Seniors attended free financial workshops, and small community groups finally had an affordable place to meet in the middle of the city. Whenever I walked those halls and heard people laughing over coffee, I thought of Aunt Cordelia. She'd understood something a lot of wealthy people never learn. Buildings only matter because of the people who fill them with purpose. Claire flourished as the foundation's executive director. Watching her confidence grow was one of the great joys of my life. She no longer worried about mortgage payments €1. Instead, she spent her days helping other families find opportunities they'd never imagined possible. One evening, she stopped by with a stack of scholarship applications. "Mom, do you know we've awarded more than 200 scholarships this year? I was hoping you'd tell me." She laughed. "You always pretend you don't already know the number. I like hearing you say it." She sat beside me at the table. "I think Aunt Cordelia would be proud." "I hope so." Tyler kept teaching at the same public high school, despite my gentle nudging toward something else. "Some jobs aren't supposed to make you rich, Mom," he told me one afternoon. "They're supposed to make you useful." He agreed to oversee the foundation's education partnerships, but only on evenings and weekends. "My students still need me Monday morning," he insisted, and I couldn't have been prouder. As for Walter, life had become much quieter. After losing the company, he took a volunteer position helping seniors navigate housing and finances after retirement. When I first heard, I smiled. €1 decades spent constructing buildings, now spent helping older people keep a roof over their heads. There was something fitting in that. Family gatherings slowly stopped being so awkward. The first Thanksgiving was tense, everyone measuring their words. The second was easier. By Christmas, the grandchildren had stopped worrying about where everyone should sit. Kids have a way of leading adults back toward normal. The following spring, Claire threw a birthday party for Miles, who'd just turned 11. The backyard filled with balloons, folding chairs, burgers on the grill, and grandchildren chasing each other through the grass. Walter arrived with a carefully wrapped gift. He looked at me across the yard, and I smiled politely. He smiled back. €1, no bitterness, no pretending none of it had happened. Just two older people who understood that peace sometimes looks different than the future they'd once pictured together. Later, Ruby, now 13, wandered over while I sat under the maple tree. "Gigi." "Yes, sweetheart." She leaned against my shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you ever really angry at Grandpa?" I looked across the yard, where Walter was helping Miles put together a telescope, laughing as the boy accidentally pointed it backward. I watched them for a long moment before answering honestly. "Yes. Really angry. For a long time." "What changed?" I thought carefully. If I'd stayed angry forever, I would have let his mistakes keep running my life. She considered that. "So forgiving someone doesn't mean what they did was okay?" "No. It means you won't let what they did decide who you become." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand. I hope you don't need that lesson for a long time." "I'll remember it anyway," she said, hugging me. That evening, once everyone had gone home, I found Aunt Cordelia's letter in my desk drawer, the paper soft from being read so many times. One line still stood above all the rest. Asterisk money magnifies character. It does not create it. Asterisk she'd been right. Walter's money had magnified his pride. Renata's ambition had magnified her greed. My inheritance had simply magnified the values I'd spent a lifetime trying to live by. Wealth hadn't rescued me €1. It had only given me more room to be the person I already wanted to be. As the sun began to set, I drove into the city one more time that evening, rode the elevator to the top floor, and stepped back out onto the rooftop terrace. The sky turned shades of orange and soft purple while, far below, millions of people hurried through another ordinary day. I smiled. A year earlier, I thought the greatest gift I'd received was $19 million and a building. I couldn't have been more wrong. The greatest gift was discovering that my worth had never depended on my husband's opinion, my bank balance, or anyone else's approval. It came from the quiet choices made over a lifetime €1, the choice to work hard, to love deeply, to forgive without forgetting, to protect my family, to stay kind without becoming naive. Those choices turned out to be the richest inheritance of all. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to think about the people who have quietly stood beside you through all your ordinary years. Sometimes they're the real treasure, and we don't fully see it until life puts us to the test. If it meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and stick around for more stories about resilience, second chances, and the quiet strength that so often comes with growing older. Thank you for spending this time with me.